teacher's pet. I went to Prescott School. The first day, Regina and I showed up at the school and went to the principal's office. We introduced ourselves and announced that we were in the same grade and wanted to enroll. We were already a month or so into the school year. The principal at first started to give us a hard time about our parents not being with us. When we explained that they had 4 others to enroll in the primary grades, she relented. She took our names and made a few calls to our last school. Regina and I sat in the principal's waiting room, a place I would frequently visit in the future. Finally, she emerged with a few papers and directed us to the hall just outside her door. There we met 2 teachers, Miss Kaiser and Miss Malotny. Miss Kaiser was a woman in her late 30s. She was well dressed and wore a bright lipstick that seemed to go well with her gray skirt and white top. Miss Malotny was quite a bit older, probably in her 60s. The teachers greeted us with a smile and a handshake as we were introduced by the principal. Then suddenly Miss Malotny asked what our names were again. She said she thought the principal said Luckette, and she muttered something under her breath about it not being possible. By this time I noticed Miss Kaiser already had Regina by the hand and had pulled her around almost behind her. "Who is this boy?" Miss Malotny asked again, pointing to me but holding her finger close to her body so as not to contaminate it by the air around me. "This is Alfred Luckette," the principal proudly announced. "Is your father's name Alfred?" the teacher asked me. "Yes," I replied. "I'm Junior." The teacher screamed and grabbed for Regina. For a few seconds, it was like 2 women at a basement sale. The principal got between them and finally asked what the problem was. Miss Malotny again pointed at me, this time, and her finger was shaking. "I had his father, and I won't take him." The principal was talking to the teachers as Miss Kaiser slowly backed down the hall with Regina. "I'm sure it will be fine. Now take him along to class," the principal said, patting Miss Malotny on the back. I looked up at Miss Malotny. She looked at me and said to come along. She turned and walked ahead of me. When we came to the class door, she opened it and waved me in. She told me to stand in front of the class while she got me a desk. She went to the back of the class and pushed one of the empty desks to the front. She butted the desk against her desk and said in a very stern voice, "You sit there and don't move till I say so." I quickly took my seat. I thought, boy, what did I do now? Miss Malotny was a pretty good teacher. She was old school. And I do mean old school. She wouldn't take any sass from anyone. I was always very quiet and seldom hung around with anyone. I was usually the first to my seat in the morning and never spoke in class. I was kind of shy and extremely introverted. Miss Malotny would ask me if I really was who I said I was. One day I was sitting at my desk with a little free time, drawing, as I loved to draw. The teacher was busy correcting the homework and was not paying attention to me staring at her, because I was drawing a likeness of her face. Before long, she caught my eye and got up and came around the desk, quickly grabbing the paper from my desk. She looked at the paper and looked at it intently, and then she looked at me, then back at the paper. She never said a word. She went back to her desk and put her head down, holding it in her 2 hands. The drawing was before her on her desk. Again, she looked at me and again at the paper. Then she called me to come around to the side of her desk. She put her arm around my shoulder and quietly told me she was sorry for treating me the way she did. "You are not like your father," she said. "You are a fine young man. Now, let's move your desk with the other students." She got up and rearranged one of the rows to include me. The class was somewhat bewildered by her actions, as was I. After we were all settled, she excused herself and took my picture with her. After a few minutes, she returned to the class with a bright smile on her face. It was the first time I could remember her smiling. Later that day, before the end of class, she told the class to check the bulletin board in the hall before we left school. When the final bell rang, I quickly went to the hall bulletin board in the main hall. There was a crowd of kids from both 5th grade classes gathered around. I pushed my way in, and there it was, my picture of Miss Malotny. She had put my picture up on the board in the hall. Miss Malotny and I got along pretty well after that. She told me about how my father acted in her class, and how he was hit with a rubber hose by the principal, and how he locked the principal in his closet and jumped out of the second-story window, how he was expelled from 6th grade and couldn't return. The teachers back then were afraid they would get him back in one of their classes. Well, when Miss Malotny heard my name, she figured I would be another troublemaker. This story is about me, and not necessarily about my father, but I have to relate some of the events in his life that directly affected how I lived and what happened to me. We were going to church at this time, my mother and us kids. Dad would go once in a while. The church was over on West Onondaga Street. It was a Pentecostal church called Grace Assembly. We attended the church even when we lived out in Manlius Center, but not as frequently. My Sunday school teacher was Brother Coots. I loved church. I liked the minister, and I liked his preaching. When we lived in East Syracuse, the church had a visiting evangelist who worked with the young people. He challenged us to invite a friend to church. The one who invited the most people would win a prize. This evangelist would draw a picture as he told a Bible story. The prize was the picture he drew for that night. He also had a yardstick wrapped with candy bars, and that was the grand prize for whoever brought the most for the week. Well, I brought East Syracuse to church. Not all, but 3 busloads. Every night there were some different people. The pastor had the buses from the church waiting in East Syracuse every night of the campaign. I won every picture and the candy bars. I kept the first picture, and every night after that, I gave the picture to someone who brought a friend. The candy bars? Well, I had a big family. The best part is what I really got from those meetings. I was moved by the messages and was sure that God was going to be with me in whatever I would do. Garage worker. Dad got a job fixing the church bus. I remember Uncle Louie coming over to the garage and helping him out. One of the buses needed a valve job. This required removing the head and grinding the valves and lapping them into the block. The engine was an old flathead, so a lot of work had to be done right on the engine as it sat in the bus. I was working on the bus one night, sitting on the front of the engine, using a lapping tool to face the seat in the block. Dad was right beside me, up on the fender, when a man came into the garage and approached us. Dad was holding a ball-peen hammer. The man said he wanted to see Alfred Luckette and produced a paper from his jacket pocket. He extended it to my father and asked if he was Alfred. The man kept prodding the paper at my father's arm, and my father kept trying to avoid being touched. It was an awkward few minutes, and then the man produced a badge and said he was a deputy sheriff. That was it. My father jumped off the bus with the hammer in hand and told the sheriff to get out, pointing the hammer at the open overhead door. The sheriff said, "You're served. I touched you with the paper." Dad was furious. He ran at the man, who turned and began to run for the door. The hammer left his hand, flying towards the sheriff. It must have missed him by only inches, hitting the edge of the doorway. The chase continued into the street, where the sheriff made it to his car and sped off. Dad had the door handle and finally had to let go. The next day, a man showed up at the garage at about 5 at night. I was still working on the bus. He was a very heavy man in a late-model car. He stood in the car's doorway and called to me. I got down and went to fetch my father. When we came downstairs, Dad told me to go back to work, that this man was a friend. I watched them talking in the driveway. Then the man pulled a big wad of money out of his front pants pocket and peeled some of it off and gave it to my father. I found out later the man was a gambler named Joe D. He gave my father money to pay the bill and get a lawyer. I didn't know what it was all about and never found out what the paper was served for. I only knew it was for a bill he never paid. Dad had known Joe D for years. He worked for him when we lived on Dingle Hole Road. Joe D had card games at his places, and I was told most of the city police department owed him in one way or the other. One time, my aunt was trying to get a driver's license and had failed a few times. When we were visiting her, she told my father about her troubles. He took her permit to Joe D. He signed his name on the top, and the next time she took the test, she passed. My father said she hit a parking meter and couldn't U-turn, but she still passed. I guess a lot of people were afraid of Mr. D. Years later, someone ran into him and killed him on Genesee Street in Syracuse. My father said it was a hit and run. Restaurant business. Things were changing in my life again. My father opened a restaurant across from Prescott School in 1957. It was a small place with a counter and a few booths. The young kids flocked in every night. He sold about 20 cases of soda daily. He introduced a 15-cent hamburger. Add a dime and you got French fries. The jukebox was always going. At first, I didn't have to do much, mostly just the heavy stuff like stacking cases and bottles. Before long, he got into an argument with the building owner over the weight of the soda cases on the floors. Dad wouldn't pay the rent, and he had to move. We moved from the dog pound to a house over on North State Street, and he opened another restaurant down the road on the other end of North State Street. By now, I had changed schools again, going to Salinas School on Lemoyne Avenue on the city's north side. The school grades were from 4th to 6th. My brother Paul went to Franklin over on Court Street. I only went there a short time, but it was there I graduated from 6th grade. During that summer, I really got acquainted with the restaurant business. We moved a lot when I was young. I never became too familiar with my surroundings, as some young people do. As I said earlier, I didn't have friends, and if I became acquainted with someone, it wasn't for long. In a few places, we had my father's nephews living with us, Tom and Bob Fortino. They were teenagers and would fight each other all the time. I remember my father breaking them up and hollering at them. They would apologize and continue to argue. Bob, the younger, would give no ground, and sometimes they broke something in their fight. I thought they were my older brothers for the longest time. Tom would pick me up and carry me under his arm, sometimes running, and I would scream. Bob liked to pick on me. My mother would holler, "Bob, stop teasing him." Bob would laugh and say something to the effect that I was teasing him. But generally, we really got along well, and as I said, I thought they were my brothers. Now, in some families, one may be designated as the pet. If our family had one, it was Princess Linda, or Queen Linda, as we sometimes referred to her as. She was pampered and protected from the rest of us. She was never too far from my mother's skirts. She was different and didn't like to get dirty or play ball. We would have to coax her to play with us. Even when Maria was the baby, Ma would be holding Linda, and Maria would be left crying on the floor. Linda played it to the hilt, never relinquishing her right to the throne or allowing Ma to move on to the next in succession. Linda turned out okay anyway. A little spoiled, but okay. Being the oldest, I was the babysitter and responsible for any wrongdoings they may have done. My father would always admonish me to watch my brothers and sisters. When they did something bad, like write on the walls, when we had walls, I would always be brought to the front with, "Why aren't you watching these kids?" Our second restaurant was located on North State Street in Syracuse, New York. The building must have been a motel or a small hotel at one time. There were individual rooms in the back along a long hall. The restaurant was 2 rooms with a separate kitchen area. Our restaurant was called Lucky's. The front room had a counter with stools, a few booths and tables. The back room had booths around the wall areas, a large dance floor, and of course a jukebox with all the latest songs. This was 1957, the golden age of rock. Elvis, Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Fabian, and a host of other rock stars drove the kids from their homes to the dance floors. That jukebox was going from 4 p.m. to 11 p.m. every day. The jukebox man would have to empty the cash box and refill the coin returns every afternoon. The only thing I remember serving there was hamburgers, French fries, and lots of sodas. Once in a while, someone would order us steak and fries, or steak and home fries. We would go through about 50 pounds of hamburger a day. Ma and I would make the hamburgers in the kitchen at night. We would scoop a little meat with an ice cream scooper onto wax paper on the table in rows, Then we would press the meatballs down into patties with the underside of a plate. Every patty was the same size. Then the patties would be stacked in the refrigerator for the next day's business. The process took about an hour. The second chore was the French fries, which were made at the time of the order, but the potatoes were washed and put in a large pot. In the morning before school, I would start the grill and put the home fries on and make the coffee. Ma would come in and serve breakfast after I left. By now I was in the 7th grade at Grant Junior High, which was located over on Grant Boulevard on the city's northeast side. It was a large school for the times. It covered grades 7th through 9th. It was about 1.5 miles from the restaurant to the school. My cousin Don attended the school with me for a while. He would never wear the shorts for gym or do any schoolwork at all. He had an attitude that he was in prison. He talked to the other kids in class as though the teacher was not there. If a teacher sent him to the office, he would get up and go and turn to me and say, "I can sit down there as well as here." The format of the school was set up very loosely. I never knew if I was passing or failing, but I must have been passing, because when we moved, my grades went with me, and I was passing. After school, I had to get to the restaurant. Every afternoon, I had to prepare for the evening crowd. I spent a lot of time doing dishes, which I really enjoyed. It was a time by myself. I enjoyed working alone and still do. Back then, I would bask in the job, totally engulfed in the task. If someone spoke to me, I would not even hear them. We had these big 3 bay sinks. One tub had dishes soaking, the other was for rinsing. The third tub was for glasses. We must have had 200 or 300 glasses. Sometimes I would spend a couple hours washing just glasses. Around 4, I would sweep the floors and wipe the tables. My mother was pregnant again for my brother Dan. She worked right up to the day she went to the hospital to deliver. She had this fetish for crushed ice. She was constantly chewing ice. She would take a towel and wrap some ice cubes in it and beat the towel with a claw hammer. She kept the hammer under the counter, and no one could touch it. When she started making crushed ice, that hammer had to be where she left it. The day she went to the hospital, she had a cup of crushed ice in one hand and the towel in the other. After Dan was born, Ma was busy with the baby and my duties really intensified. It was summer vacation from school, but not from the restaurant. We were taking in a lot of money. Some nights on the weekend I counted as much as $700. But where was it all going? I never knew, and I never found out. My father was the poorest money manager I ever heard of, even to this day. I was 13 years old near the end of the restaurant run. I came up with 2 ideas that were earning money. First, on a Friday and a Saturday night, I roped off the back room and charged 25 cents to go into the dance floor. The teenagers came by the hundreds. There was this one kid who would put on a show with a broom. He would play an Elvis song on the jukebox and then use the broom like a guitar. He was hilarious. Even when the high schoolers had a school dance, they all ended up at Lucky's. The second thing I came up with was the $1 pizza. It was a 9-inch pizza I baked in a small electric oven. While shopping one day, I came across these pizza shells in the bakery. I begged my father to buy some, which he did, to my surprise. We had this little oven that just held the shell. We already had the sauce cooked up, so all I needed was some peppers and pepperoni. I sold a lot of the pizzas, and my father was surprised at it and let me sell them as long as he got the money. I never got paid anything, nor did I expect anything. "You are eating and sleeping. What more do you want?" my father would say. By the end of the following school year, we were forced to move. I was in the end of my 7th school year, with only a month to go till summer. Raising chickens. Our move was out of town, first to Mexico for a while, then up on Route 11 in the town of Pulaski. I got enrolled in school just in time for final test. I did okay, and was moved into the 8th grade. Some of my siblings did not fare as well and had to repeat the grade. The Pulaski home was an old farmhouse. There was a lot of land around the house, and my father decided to do some farming. It lasted about one day. He started to plow with an old cleat tractor, pulling a set of plows that were designed for horses. I sat on the plows and he pulled it along. When he turned around, the plows would flip over and I would be thrown off. We dug up the backyard with these deep furrows, but couldn't figure out how to smooth the ground out. Dad said we'd finish it the next day. We never went back there again. We did start getting chickens and ducks. We used the same ploy we used when we lived on Dingle Hole Road. When you buy chicken feed, the farm store would give you baby chicks. We got an incubator and raised chickens. Meantime, my father did some mechanical work. Paul and I did a lot of this with him. My work went from frying meat to removing engine parts almost overnight. We had this cleat track tractor, which resembled a bulldozer. It started with a crank. My father took the engine out and put a Chevy 6 in it. We used it that winter to push the snow. Paul and I would take engines out and do all sorts of mechanical work. I had grease on my hands and arms most of the time. After a while, we had a lot of chickens. It was our main source of food, eggs and chickens. Dad eked out a meager living with just getting by repairing a car or welding something for somebody. All of us kids got the mumps while we lived there. It was a painful experience. I remember my mother making donuts and sprinkling powdered sugar on them, and we were so sick and our mouths so sore, we couldn't eat them. A visiting nurse gave us some comfort in medicine form, and after about 2 weeks, we recovered. We didn't have an inside toilet there. It was out back, off the kitchen door about 30 feet. We used a phone book for toilet paper. The shed was a 3-seater, although I can't really remember anyone sharing the shed. The door on the outhouse was a board with a spring attached to the inside. The spring held the door closed. There was no latch on the door, so we would stick a piece of paper from the phone book in the door to indicate it was occupied. We had a big barrel out behind the shed to burn our trash. When it got full, we dumped it over and kept burning. As a result, the backyard had a lot of ash and partially burned papers. Of course, the wind helped to move the trash further back into the woods area. Winter was tough, and it reminded me of Dingle Hole Road.